Hi, my name is Erik. I'm one of the co-authors of Calista's Paradox, the upcoming book about legacy, and I will first introduce myself briefly. So I am Swedish, I'm 51 years old, I grew up in Gothenburg. I then did the army, so I've been a soldier in the Swedish army. I was a sergeant for a small group. You learn a lot about leadership skills and other useful things there. I then moved to Norway, and I studied to become a captain. I have a full captain's degree. It's a Bachelor of Nautical Science, but it gives me the right to, it has expired now, but I can theoretically drive all ships anywhere in the world, no matter how big they are. So that's always a good skill to have. Then during my time at sea, I figured out it was not for me, so I went back to school and I studied a Masters of Finance at the Norwegian School of Economics in a school. And then I went from St. Gallen to London, where I worked 6 years in big global banks. And then I moved to Nordea in Copenhagen, which is a big Nordic bank, Nordea, the biggest Nordic bank. And then I worked for Danske Bank, the second largest Nordic bank, where I moved up and I became global head of FX, where I was responsible for the foreign exchange trading for the bank all around the world. And I had a team of 150 people, all in 8 countries or so. Then I did a startup. So I've been a co-founder of a startup, and I raised a seed round. So I know what it's like to be a startup founder. And now I run my own seed VC, pre-seed fintech VC firm, alongside my job as a day job as a consultant at Bearing Point, where I focus on banks. So I have 3 sort of day jobs. I have a Bearing Point where I am a senior advisor for banks, and I talk to senior management about their tech problems. I run ERIK Ventures where I invest in pre-seed fintechs, and I am a CEO of a small independent book publishing company called Calista's Paradox. And our first book out in May 26 will be Calista's Paradox, a book about legacy, a novella and a management book. Now, one question one could ask is, why do I have the right to have an opinion about something like legacy? Legacy is an interesting word. Many people use it, and we have found that people mean different things when they say legacy. One other thing we have found is that non-native speakers of English will actually sometimes mean slightly different things than native English speakers. That's interesting in itself. What we found is that when in my day job as a consultant at Bearing Point, where I would speak to senior management about their tech problems in predominantly banks, I have a banking background, we found that banks were very keen to follow the advice that we would give, and they had grand plans, and they would want to build AI, and they would do many good things that they would want to do. But it's hard, and one of the reasons that would come up again and again would be that the senior management would say, well, we would love to do what you say, but we can't because we have so much legacy buildup. And by legacy buildup, they often refer to the technical buildup. Decades on decades of IT stacked on each other and then held together with duct tape and integrated in a haphazard way, and has been built layer on layer through decades, sometimes 4 or 5 decades. And somewhere there would be a mainframe, that computer that nobody has documented properly. And so people actually, they would want to, but they can't build the IT the way they want. And we worked a lot with this problem, and then we wrote a white paper in Bearing Point about 2-3 years ago about the phenomenon of legacy, where we got contributors from many different industries, from the military, we had and aviation and psychotherapy, and otherwise. And we studied the phenomenon of build-up of something over time, where you eventually reach some sort of saturation point where you essentially can't move in any direction. And the question then is how to move away from that and how to analyze that. Now, I've spent about 2-3 years of my last, the professional career diving into this topic, and I've had more than 150 C-level, most of them CEO meetings, discussing this phenomena. So anybody can have an opinion, and I may or may not have a good one, but I certainly have spent 3 years, and I've had hundreds of client meetings, and I have worked with many educated colleagues, and I have written to a white paper and a book on this subject. So I believe I have something sensible worth while listening to say.
The book sounds very interesting. Tell us about it.
The book that we are about to come out with is it's a fictional novella that will make the reader experience a concept called legacy. And we have deliberately put the book into 3 different parts. The first part is a novella, a fictional story about a young woman called Calista, hence the name Calista's Paradox. Calista sort of reluctantly inherits a family empire of gemstones, and she has to fix this because the gemstone company is full of problems. And it turns out, when she starts to rescue the company, that these problems are actually different than anybody thought. They are entangled through history, through the decades, and are far more complicated than anybody could think. And the root causes lie way back in history. And that's the way that we see quite often in other areas when we work with problems, that they are much bigger and more long dated than anybody thought. So they are legacy problems, really. So that's the first bit. Then there follows a second part in the book where we sort of have a more of a factual approach, where we explain what these legacies are and how they surface in the novella. So our little dream is that when a reader has read the novella first time and then they read the second part, they think, oh, this was interesting, there's something I missed, and they will read the novella again and realize that they had missed some of the story, some layers were lost that they now have learned. And then there's a third part where we have personal observations and solutions to legacy, where about 18 or so different co-authors has helped us, or contributing authors have helped us with that.
I've heard about a couple of interesting characters from the book called Speedo and Spero. Who are they?
So in the book, one of the main characters is a slightly delusioned, a little bit alcoholic, possibly consultant that has worked way too hard all his life, and it hasn't gone exactly how it's planned, but he's onto this legacy, and he has seen the light, and he wants others to see the light. And it's hard because people don't really get it, and he is now getting a chance here to help the main character with this expertise of his. And when he gets really stressed, he starts to draw small drawings, and he will draw a little cartoon consisting usually of only 2 time pieces. So it's like a before and an after picture in a little cartoon called Speedo and Spero, and it always usually ends up pretty bad for the little cartoon. So it's a little round head footer, it has one of these that small kids draw, just heads and feet on a big round body, and he will do things and then it will end up bad. They're a bit humorous, but that's something that came out of my childhood. I drew them when I was a kid, and now we want to put them in the story to make this character a little bit less sinister and dreadful.
Who would enjoy reading Calista's Paradox?
Who is the target audience of Calista's Paradox? That's a question we get a lot. And then we started off, the very initial thoughts of making this book came in a room full of consultants, and it would have been a prolongation of a white paper that was very dry in its tone, very business focused. But then we had the insane luck of coming across Elaine Stirling. It's a story in itself how we got to meet. But Elaine said that, guys, do you know your demographics? If you want to appeal to readers, you need to write also so that it appeals to younger women. And to be honest, guys, if you write the way you think or thought that you would have written, you will sell tops 5,000 books globally if you're lucky. So you need to make a fictional story that somebody wants to read. And so the book is targeting novella readers, anybody that enjoy a really good and complicated and interesting story. But then also, at the same time, it can appeal to dudes like me. Usually I don't wear a hoodie, I wear a tie and a suit, and I'm quite serious. And that kind of, people that fly around the world doing consulting or banking that have an interest in change management in the corporate setting. So we have a dual target group in that sense. Anybody that would read a novella, and we know from history that it is usually younger women, and then we have all the boring dudes like me.
What are some of the legacy concepts that you introduce in the book, whether part 1 or part 2?
Yeah. The legacy concepts that we introduce in the book. So the interesting thing that we have come across with the word legacy is that actually the word is a little bit sort of unclaimed. It's used by different people in different contexts. Native English speakers mean something different than non-native English speakers about it. That's what we have found out. Legacy can be many things, and one definition, of course, it can be forward-looking. I will leave a legacy behind. It can also be backwards-looking. I have a legacy of some kind. It can be positive or negative. And then it can be sort of theatrical almost, like a king has a legacy. King X expanded the country's territory by 10 times, and that will be his legacy now. That is often most common usage of the word. Unless you are a consultant, then legacy system will be the most common usage of the word. A legacy system means an old system that doesn't really serve its purpose nowadays. And people would love to get rid of it, but they can't because it's too expensive, too entangled, and too difficult. One definition we have come up with is legacy is the situation you're in because of the history you have. So essentially your starting point now, where you are now, and because why have you come to this point? It's very important. Not only where you are, why you have come to this point. Because that will lead you to how to move on from there. It's very defined not only from where you are, but how you got there. Because you will have aggregated some scars in that, some likes and dislikes in that journey. And then different methods for the future will be appropriate depending on what led you here, not only where you are.
What is bearing point and what is their connection to Calista's paradox?
Yeah, that's a good question. We get that a lot. There are sort of three legal entities at play here. There is Bearing Point, there is ERIK Ventures, and there is Calista's Paradox. So Bearing Point is a global tech consulting company where I work roughly a third of my time. And I work there as a senior advisor. And my day goes into speaking to senior management in banks around the Nordics about their tech problems. And that's Bearing Point. Now then, Bearing Point, where we worked, when I worked there, we wrote the white paper. That is the original thought work that then has become a book. That book is then in an independent, standalone company where there is no sort of legal benefit or financial benefit for Bearing Point in any form. It's an independent publishing company, Calista's Paradox. And in there I am CEO, and we have a CLO, Chief Literature Officer, Elaine Stirling, and then we have some more great guys in there, and we are now writing a number of books, of which Calista's Paradox is the first one. Then the third entity that matters here is something called ERIK Ventures. The ERIK Ventures is my own little pre-seed fintech fund, where I invest in early day startups, where I have a crew of 6 guys part-time that help me, all awesome people, but these things have no legal connection with each other or any financial sort of entanglement other than that Calista is owned by ERIK Ventures partly, or Erik Åkesson myself. So that's how these things relate to each other.
Okay, so a lot of books these days are kind of depressing and it's all about the apocalypse and hopelessness. Is Callista's Paradox another one of those?
So one of the things we wanted to do with Calista's Paradox is to give some hope in the sense that I think many people can relate to the feeling that, okay, I'm here, things are bad, what am I going to do? Maybe nothing can be done. And then you enter this negative spiral of hopelessness, where hopelessness just feeds and attracts even more hopelessness. And then you end up not being able to do anything. And I think one of the things with legacy is, in the way we define it now, that you look at your history and why you got there, is that yeah, sure, it can be hard, but if you want to do something, it is possible. Most of the time, very rarely is it impossible to do something. You can always improve the situation. But what we are saying is that if you are somewhere that you don't want to be, but you'd rather be somewhere else, in consulting lingo, that is known as an as-is analysis, and then you have a target state. And usually the as-is analysis is a fairly swift thing, but the target state, a lot of money is put into that. And then you have a strategy, a journey from here to there. A lot of money is put into that, and consultancies are hired for millions to fix this, and millions of hours in corporates are spent with it. And in a personal context, people have a goal. Maybe they want to lose weight, maybe they want to get smarter, whatever. They very quickly set on to find a target state. The problem with that is that if you don't spend a little bit of time analyzing on the as-is, so not only where am I? That's usually the easy question. Where am I? What is harder, and what we think that we want to shine some light on in this book, is that it makes sense to spend a bit of time on why am I here? If you are ever in the kind of trouble that you need psychotherapy, you will find out that you go there to figure out what's wrong with you, to put it simply. And the question you ask yourself is, why am I the way I am, and what led me here? So what are the events that formed and shaped me in my current state? And you're usually in therapy because you want to fix something. And that is a very deep as-is or legacy analysis. And then you can set on from there with these new learnings on that journey for the future. And what we are trying to do is to give some hope to people that feel a bit stuck, that whether they being corporate or they being persons, if you're a person and you want to do something, think meaningfully about why you are where you are, but more importantly, why, so that you know. Then set out with a number of measures to fix it. And if you're a corporate, spend a little bit more time on the as-is analysis than you previously do in your change efforts, because otherwise you might set the right direction by the wrong methods, and you might move in the wrong speed towards that goal, so that some people just fall off the cliff. And you will always have an element of people falling off the cliff or worse, burnout, or they leave, but you need to have the damage in the proportion to the benefits. So if you want to move ahead so quickly that you lose everybody, then it wasn't really a good thing. So you need to have a sense and a tolerance and a feeling for your organizations or your own ability to absorb change. And legacy analysis is what we recommend. And that's what we try to do in the book. If you are aware of your legacy, you can make far better decisions about your future.
Something in the book, it comes up in the novella and later in the book, called optimal rate of change, ORC. Could you expand on that?
Yeah, in the book, we have, in the original white paper, we have developed a concept called the optimal rate of change. Now, for those that are finance dudes, we will recognize from school an efficient frontier in investing, where you will have a risk and reward pattern that is equal, and that you can choose any of these points. You can choose to take more risk, or you can choose to get more reward, but then you will have to tolerate more risk. They can all be efficient from a risk-reward point of view. And we believe a very similar pattern exists in change management. You can push really hard for change, fast, maybe too fast, but maybe the change is needed. But then you will have to tolerate a certain amount of collateral damage. Maybe some key stakeholders leave, maybe the burnout rate goes up, and you have to be prepared that these negative effects will hit you. But if a change is so necessary to happen that you need to force it through real quickly, then you have to be aware that there will be, and you need a discussion around that. What we often see is that, and I've experienced that myself, I had driven a large number of big change projects, and I have inherited a large number of failed teams that I had to fix. And I experienced a very common pattern there every time. The big bosses would send me in and say, "Hey, Eric, this team is failed. Can you fix it?" And then I would go, "Certainly." And then I would be sent there on a 2-3 year mission to fix a failed team, and I would start to fix it. And I would quickly figure out that there are some people that are not up for it and that have to be removed. And then people are unhappy. And then the big bosses would come back and say, "But Eric, they are now unhappy." I'm like, "Yeah, of course. I am sucking some of them. Yeah, but can't you make this big change without anybody being angry?" No, that can't be done. Really sorry. But the big bosses often want this impossible combo of fast, dramatic change, but no side effects. And I'm really sorry to all big bosses out there. It doesn't happen. So you either have to tolerate slow change with happy people or fast change with some unhappy people. You just have to be really aware of who is unhappy. Because some people you want unhappy. You actually want them to leave. And that is sort of how hard can you push change? And it is very hard. A lot of people ask us, "Yeah, but tell us then numerically, where is our optimal rate of change? Like 47 and you are at 49, so it's bad now." Or you can never put a number on it like that. I'm sure we could invent a framework, but it would be still subjective. My advice from my experience is this: you will have a team. You will have the few good people, the really hardworking, the ones that you rely on, the cornerstones in your culture. These guys usually don't complain, they soldier on, and they help you drive change. Cheer them on. Then you have the big bulk. These people, you believe they follow you, they don't. They follow that cornerstone people. And then you have the resistance, the 10% complainers. They should be unhappy because the culture is changing and they are going to leave, or they're going to be told to leave. And I think it's quite important to make it very clear to them very early that change your behavior or get out. Otherwise, you will have them creating revolutions and rebellion and resistance, and that 80% might lean their way. You need to rob the 80% of any leadership in that direction, and you need to cheer the leadership in the positive direction. Now, the thing is the following. How hard can you push then? My experience is this. You can push very hard, but when the top guys, these top 10% that really want the same thing, that you really trust, when one of them come and say to you, "I'm really tired now, I can't take the anymore," that's when you should sort of stop. So push the pedal until one of the trusted few top performers come and tell you, "Time to calm down." Then listen very carefully to that. Because if you don't stop, and I'm guilty of this, you will squeeze one of them out. And then you have really shot yourself in the foot.
I understand that you've co-authored with someone who lives across the ocean from you, Finland and Canada. What was the collaborative process like? What did you both learn from it?
So the Calista's book has come across. It originated in a very sort of a formal and a corporate setting from a white paper, and you can find the white paper if you search for Bearing Point Legacy white paper. You will find it. You can download for free, and you will read that, and you will find there's a very formal tone to it. And that was the original. We set out to write an extension of that, essentially targeted at business people. And then through some lucky randomness and a bucket of blueberries and a few other things, we came in contact with an author in Canada. Her name is Elaine Stirling. And we started to discuss that she would help us to do the book. And then through some events and different opinions on how to do this book, it ended up so instead that Elaine and I co-authored this book. And then that changed the entire setup of how the book would be. Because what she said is essentially that, now guys, I have, and Elaine has been, she has spent like almost 20 years teaching corporate writing at the University of Toronto, and then she has published 12 books. So an experienced author. But now, this is Elaine, where I need to say how old you are.
Why?
Yeah, don't know, but now I destroyed the thing. But to me, it's such a obvious thing to say.
No, I get to say it. You don't.
Okay, so we have to start over here now. Yeah. But I need to say that you're older than me then. That is
I have 40 years experience in writing. That should already tell people.
Okay, that's good.
Okay, so you can start over.
Yeah. So, okay. So when a few words on team dynamics and how a concept like this develops. It has happened in a very unusual way for us. So we started off thinking we would make a prolongation, like an extension of the original white paper that was quite dry in the tone, targeting specifically corporate management or senior management, so people that read for facts. Then through some fortune and good luck and a bucket of blueberries by a Syrian refugee in Finland, it's a long story that we can tell some other day, I came in contact with Elaine Stirling. And Elaine then has a longer career than me. She's from Canada, so there's a cultural setting, even though her heritage is from Finland. So all her 4 grandparents are from Finland. But she has an author's background, and she has spent more than 40 years as an author or a corporate trainer in writing. So she has an extensive experience in that. And when we came to her and asked her to be our sort of helping hand and or coach in this project, she said, guys, are you really going to write a boring, dry management book that nobody will read? You need to know your demographics. So suddenly we as consultants were shaken by some facts that we were not aware of in terms of what, and then you also ask the question yourself, what is a book success? Do you just want to do you want to sell as many books as possible? Or are you on a mission to change the world or enlighten the world somehow, and so on? And we are like in between. We believe we have found a really interesting piece of information that the world has a little bit overlooked, and we want to bring that to the surface. So for those of you that know the word Sophie's World, it's a book about philosophy targeting young people, and they essentially made the philosophy accessible to the wider audience. We hope to do the same for legacy here, what Sophie's World did for philosophy, and so that's why the whole dynamics changed. Because suddenly we had an experienced author that started to tell us facts. So then, do we want to sell books, or do we just want to educate the world on legacy? We want to do both. Obviously, we set out to sell 1 million copies. It is senseless to start to write a book with a low ambition level. You just don't do that. We want to sell 1 million copies, and we want to develop a brand around this. And we want to have a commercial success as well. There is absolutely nothing bad. On the contrary, it is great to have a commercial success. It proves that people want to read what you have written. But we want to bring this forward, and it's a commercial thing too. Now, what happened here, that's when we brought an experienced author in, is that the whole dynamics changed, and the book went from being a sort of a dry piece to a much more easy accessible piece, where it is a story that will appeal to readers whether they care about legacy or not. And the factual part, that it's the second part of the book, is also far less dry. It's not written in this sort of corporate tone rather than a me tone. I have experienced this and it led to this and that. So they are also stories in them in their own right. So the whole dynamics changed, and it's been very interesting to work with somebody that is sort of extremely professional but in a totally different field. And we have found out many interesting things, such as you can be an author and know a million things about books, but you can know absolutely nothing about finance and shareholders agreements. So we have had a lot of sort of learnings mutually, hopefully.
So tell us about the different legacies.
So legacy comes in many forms. It can be sort of forward-looking, like what will be the legacy of the situation in the future, and then what is my legacy, so historical. And that can of course be also negative or positive legacy. Now we often, when we speak about it in the context of our framework here and for corporate change management purposes, we often think about 4 buckets of legacy. You can have psychological legacy. All of us have it. We can have our likes and dislikes based on our history. And sometimes even you can have inherited likes and dislikes from somebody else. And you will see that when you read the book, that some of your experiences are not your own. You learn from somebody else to like or dislike something. So that's a psychological legacy. You can have cultural legacy. It's sort of aggregated psychological legacy. We usually think of it as culture, like this is how it is here. And then you can have process legacy. Process legacy is basically the way we do it here in terms of sort of processes. And a good example there is that like a good friend of mine, he moved in with a girl and they were going to do an oven steak, and then the lady said, we need to cut the corners of the oven steak so at the end, so that it's and he said, but why? Yeah, well, that's how my mom did it, so that's what we will do. And the guy was very smart, and so he wanted to stay married to this wife of his, and he decided of course to agree, as you do. And then they cut the steak corners off and put the steak in the oven. And then when they met the mom next time, they asked, why is it that we do this? And she said, oh, you have to, because my oven tray is too narrow, otherwise it doesn't fit. So that's a very interesting thing, and it's a mundane example, but essentially something had to be done a certain way in another setting. And that was now taught to the next generation, and she would have taught it to her kids. And if the mom had died before telling this, they would have done something that is actually totally useless for anybody else, but very relevant for them. And you will find many steaks brewing in your organization if you look around. Like, why do we do it? Well, it was fit for the 1960s process. It's no longer fit. And to question these are very important. So then we have operational, psychological, cultural, and then we have technical. That's the one that's easiest to understand. Essentially, your IT stack is out of date. And that we come across all the time, and that is basically also sort of a lot of what the consultants do. We travel around and we help people fix their IT stack. That is one also that is the one that's easiest to put a price tag on. If you need a new system, you need to get rid of the old, migrate the data, buy a new license, integrate all of the systems. It will be 20 guys for 3 months and it will cost you 5 million, or there will be a number. That's the one. The other ones are far harder to put a price tag on. Then, as we know, the IT projects go out of whack every time too. So that's not easy to put the price tag, but it's easier to put a price tag on an upgrade of an IT system than a change of a culture. So these are the 4 buckets: psychological, cultural, operational, and technical legacy. These are the ones that we have there.
Tell us about healthcare legacy, both personally and globally.
Legacy exists in many sectors, maybe every sector, actually. And maybe every one of us has it too. So legacy is an omnipresent phenomenon. In the white paper and also in the book, we have studied white papers from different perspectives, and we have deliberately picked out a few sectors that are very different to prove the point that legacy is everywhere. We are also so lucky that we've been able to get really experienced senior sort of contributing authors. So these are not only our thoughts, they are from people with deep expertise in the domains. If we start with healthcare, so healthcare is it's fascinating because the word healthcare is actually misleading in the sense that healthcare is actually sick care. You have a limited amount of tax money, you decide to take that tax money partly to healthcare, and then you build big factories to treat sick people and you call them hospitals. And then you essentially wait for people to get ill, and then you take them into these factories or hospitals and you treat them. That's expensive, and then you have rehab, that's expensive, and then you send them back as good taxpayers. That is the mechanism. Now, of course, some of the care cannot be prevented, like accident, a car crash and so on. We need an element of reactive care. But actually, very, very big portions of the healthcare budgets are tied up with things that could have been prevented. So from the society's point of view, we would be far better off in the longer term to start to take some funding out of the sick care system, so the hospitals, and start to use the money to preventive healthcare, to make sure people are not ill later. The problem with that is that it's a really impossible win for any politician to say, hey, vote for me because I will shut down a couple of hospitals, save some money, have massive anti-smoking, train better, live better, eat healthier campaigns. And like 20, 30 years from now, people will be real healthy and we will need far fewer hospitals and all of us will be better off with a limited healthcare buck. You don't win elections like that. So nobody can really do these big shifts. But what would be needed, there is a big legacy mental problem in healthcare. Healthcare is actually sick care. And what we should do is to direct funding away from the reactive to the proactive care. It's just that there is time lag before the benefits come in. But that's a big mental legacy problem there. Sadly now when I work on it, I see that people are aware. It's just that they cannot overcome that time gap where the benefits are too far in the future to do this now. That's what's on healthcare. Now,
what about your personal experience of healthcare legacy?
Yeah, then one other aspect of healthcare is that if you look not on the healthcare system as such, but that if you look at an individual's physiological situation, it can also be a psychological situation, but physiological is easy to talk about. If you are obese, you will eventually end up either dying early or ending up in hospital somehow. That is not a certainty, but a near certainty. So you are far better off, well, for the society, but for yourself, you're far better off being fit. You start losing muscle mass a lot from the age of 40 or so. What you should really do is, not only for vanity reasons, but your muscle mass is your longevity organ. You really need to pound on muscle mass when you can, because otherwise you lose it. And the stronger you are, the more likely you are to survive a fall when you're 80. Not to mention the fact that if you're strong and still mobile, when you're 85, you can still crawl around on all four with the grandkids rather than watch them from a wheelchair. That I think is maybe the biggest reason to do it. But when you look at your own physiological state, a lot of people simply are a bit unhappy with, I'm a bit fat, I'm not strong enough, whatever it might be. And then they set out to some quick fix, diet or a little bit of training or something. But if you meaningfully want to change it, to have a long-term better health span with a longer life expectancy, but more importantly, a longer health expectancy, that is healthy life. You need to be stronger, simply. You need to have more muscle, not to look better, but to be stronger. And you need to lose most likely fat. And for all these things to happen, you're going to have to change a few things. Now, most people are unwilling to do the hard work that goes into it. But then even if you want, you need to do exactly what to do. And to be able to know what to do, you need to do a legacy analysis on your own situation. And then you need to look into, why did I end up in this slightly obese, less muscular sort of situation? Well, there will be some easy answers. I eat bad food and I drink too much or train too little or something. But go beyond the surface of that and look deeply into why you ended up with. And you will find out that your health will rely on the sleep, will be very important. And you don't think about that at first. But sleep has so much to do with recovery, hormone production, and any other things that feed into the others, such as training will be useless if you don't sleep properly. And nutrition doesn't really help if you don't train and sleep well. And then stress levels are really important. And you need to look quite deeply into why these things are the way they are, how are they entangled, and what things in your life has to change for these to be collectively fixed. Only then will you successfully fix your health. So there again, you need to do a legacy analysis on your own physiological health situation.
Tell us about banking legacy.
Banks have legacies than sort of any other organization. And that's also, of course, given my background, 20 years in banking before I became a consultant, and then I have my own VC fintech firm. I know a lot about that. And banks have a couple of specific problems. One they have in common with the aviation. For those of you that saw the aviation bit, aviation have the problem, they have the situation that safety is a culture that overrules all things. And that's really great for flying, but that safety has a negative spillover effect on all other areas of running an aviation company. So when you try to develop and test on the website, that will be slow because somebody has safety concerns. So you have this spillover effect. Banks have something similar. It's called usually it is compliance, credit and compliance and legal. These things are always important, extremely important. If you are a heavily regulated business, you have to be always compliant. And you should lend to people that pay money back. So you need to have good credit. Otherwise you go bust. They are fundamental basics. Now the problem, just like in aviation there, is that some of this extreme rigor in following rules will have a spillover on areas that could be handled slightly more loosely. When you work on the customer journeys on the websites, when you try to bundle products, when you try to develop some new products, some of that work could be done in a little more of a startup fashion, like fail fast. But fail fast is impossible to do when you have a credit and compliance culture that is so robust. So banks need to be able to segregate. We should always be compliant over here. But in these processes, we allow for a certain degree of flexibility. It doesn't mean that we break rules deliberately, but that we have a higher risk for it than over here. Because here it's a comply or die, but over there it's a comply and that will not be good, but we will fix it kind of situation. And I think to be able to segregate these things is very important. You have one feature with banking, and that's the long-termness of the products. The longest products that I have seen have been closer to 100 years. You can do very long-dated inflation swaps that can easily have 50-year lifespan, and they can have longer than that sometimes. That means that when you do the trade, a trader will have a big bonus on day one, and then you will leave a 100-year risk management problem with the bank. There is something with, in banks you will have different kind of people, and you will have very aggressive, very profit-driven, super intelligent alpha dudes on the trade floors that are very sort of geared towards coming up with new and fancy products that they can sell. And then there will be some products left on the books for somebody to manage, but it's not their problem. They have already cashed in the bonus and moved on. There are people like that. It's very important for the bank to understand the full life cycle cost of new products. Like who is going to risk management and for how long and how many people will that take? So this thing, before you say yes to a new product, be very mindful of the long-term costs of that, because otherwise you get yourself into big long-term legacy problems for short-term profit here and now.
Halo effect.
Yeah, halo effect. By that we mean that somebody has like a halo, like an angel, and that's a great thing. It's only that shines on all other things, and then out there people have to be equally good as that angel. And the problem is with halo effect then that it might be great to be a good angel, but then maybe some other people do not have the ability to be as good all the time. You have it in many industries, but we have come across it both in aviation and in banking. In aviation, you have the halo effect of safety and security. The planes should never fall down, and we all love that, of course. What you don't want to have is the pilot to say, "Good morning, everyone, it's the captain speaking. Today we will ignore the procedures and we will have a fail fast start today. Me and the co-pilot will do something new and untested." You don't want to hear that. You want it to be dead safe. But somewhere in the airline, there is somebody that should be allowed to trial and error a little bit, and that is stopped. Similarly, in banking, compliance rules everything. You never mess with that. Comply or die is the mantra, and that is great. In parts of the bank and in most parts of the banks, it should be like that. But then they also have procedures that can be a little bit more startup-y and fail fast kind of things. You can trial and error because the consequence of a mistake isn't catastrophic. But the compliance culture will overrule and kill that. That makes it hard for the banks to compete with the startups that are coming into the fintech scene. So that's the negative halo effect we talk about. One feature of the banks is that they suffer from a bit of an early mover advantage. So banks started to digitalize earlier than many other sectors. And then the reason that they started is not that they thought, let's have great client experience here. No, they needed to do cost cutting. And the way to go was, of course, to outsource some of the work to the clients and have online solutions. And that's what happened. All of us that are old enough, like me, I'm 51, we can remember when we were small and would go with mom and dad to the bank. There would be many people there, and they would fill in small forms and things. All that is gone now. We all know it. And there are far fewer branches. Now, because that digitalization has happened earlier in banking than many other places, that meant that they started to also aggregate IT legacy earlier than many other sectors. And that is now a bit of a second move or an early mover disadvantage. It was good for some time, but now they are stuck with IT systems that are 50 years old. You come across very senior people that say something like, "Oh, I wish we could only build good AI like the fintechs can." but our data is in disarray, and all I know is that there is a mainframe somewhere nobody can touch. And that is a very bad starting point to build AI. And that is because the aggregation of technical legacy started so long time ago. That is now a problem for the banks.
A few moments later. Five minutes later. $15 minutes later.
And now you can see here ERIK Ventures and my header.
I only see Eric.
So what do we
I see
do?
Ventures, but I see it in that camera.
Oh, but we want to fix it. So
Okay, then fix this.
So what did you see?
That's just to Eric. So it needs...
And was it too much space on top?
No, it was just that little bit. Just needs the...
75 years later.
Yeah, perfect.